Good evening and welcome to Aubrey's Story Time, which is a time for stories read by an Aubrey, and I am an Aubrey. So it is my story time, and it's a chance for me to share with you some lovely little stories that I've discovered or encountered whilst on tour, or that I've made up. Because some of them are true and some of them are bollocks, and that's part of a little game we'll play as well. And basically, I have my two streams. I have Fizzy Brain, where I basically explain how I make stuff and how I write stuff and how things come together, and this is more of a sort of an actual kind of planned, organised version. Like I say, I tell stories. So there's going to be 3 stories this evening, all going along with the theme, and I'm going to let you guess which one of those 3, if any of them, is true or complete bollocks. Nothing essential to it. It's just a fun little game. If people are quite happy just to listen to the stories and don't need to play a game of guess the story, guess the bollocks, then we'll just carry on. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tell you in the stream or in our lovely chat afterwards, if you're listening, or if you're watching live on Twitch. I won't be giving the answer this evening. I'll be giving the answer at the next stream next month. But you are fully welcome to put what your guesses of 1, 2 or 3 is true or false, bollocks, really good idea or made up, in the comment section of this video, podcast, or however you're listening to it. And if you're in the chat, feel free to natter away about it. I won't be replying to the chat as I'm going along, but I will be having a chat with you guys after the broadcast, when we'll have our Twitch exclusive conversation where we just talk utter bollocks. And if you wanted to lay out your theories of what you think is true or false, I'll have a natter. I won't answer really like say which is good or bad. I'll just let you know. So it's kind of like a little fun little guessing game, and then we get drunk. So I will be slightly sloshed. Well, actually, I'm not slightly sloshed. This is my first gin. So if you want to drink along, feel free. Make your own drinking game rules up. I will leave it entirely to you, the lovely audience. Oh, one rule. Do not Google. What is the point? You're like one of those sad wankers that goes to a pub quiz and hustles it. Don't be that guy. Just have a bit of fun. Sit back, enjoy yourself, hear the weird stories, and we'll go forward. Okay, so before we tell our stories, we'll do a little bit of housework, or housekeeping. I keep saying housework instead of housekeeping, you know what I mean. So this point, going forward, will be the point where I tell you about last week's stream and which story is true or false. But this is a new game, so we're not going to bother with that. But what I will tell you about is what we call the British Rail Book Club. This is a continual thing that I've been doing on tour, because, you know, I'm always touring, always playing shows. And when I'm on the train, I like to read certain books. And I invite you guys to tell me what you've been reading, what I've been reading. Now, I've been reading this one continually for a little while. This is the Dean Koontz, I can never pronounce it right, Odd Thomas book. Fantastic. Now, normally, regular streamers or listeners will know that I basically swap between 2 or 3 books on the train. This one has been my solo book for a little while, and it has been upgraded from not just on the British Rail Book Club, but to my British Rail Poop Club, which is basically my toilet book as well. So I get a little bit of a read every morning and on the train, because currently I'm having a little break from the tour. So yeah, to keep on reading it, because it's interesting, I've been saving a little time every morning. So yes, let me know, either in the comments or whatever, what you're reading, and if you want to, we can have a chat about it later on if you're live on Twitch. Now that's the housekeeping out of the way. So, you got our 3 stories, all of a theme this week. In fact, let's do a little, because we'll pretend that this eventually will be a world famous podcast with music and everything. So I'll do a little theme tune. No expense to spare. Float into the night, we begin our story time. So this week our 3 stories are all connected to Henry VIII, hence why I'm wearing a ruff. For those of you who are on the podcast version of this show, I'm wearing a ruff. And I've been prancing around on social media with a tiny little skull that I've put an incense stick in, which I've called Jeff. So Jeff will be joining us on the stream. This is Jeff, who is my incense holder. I am holding up a tiny ceramic skull. I made this in college. Not sure why. Oh wait, I was doing a Vanitas project, which actually fits in with Henry VIII, because it was a famous art movement that people like Holbein used to be involved in, where you would put symbols of death and mortality in inside paintings. And one of them, this isn't a story by the way, this is just a story tangent of the story. And if you may remember a famous Henry VIII painting with a mysterious skull on one side, that is part of the Vanitas movement, putting weird little skulls all over the place. And it's symbols like candles, sextants, globes, all these things are little tiny bits of still life in a portrait that basically mean death in a very morbid kind of way. So, yeah, like I said, we've got 3 stories about Henry VIII. Why Henry VIII? Why the ruff? Why the eyeliner? Why the mysterious beard? Well, some of it was already here anyway, but the reason I ended up thinking about it was 2 reasons. One, during my recent set of tours, I have had the pleasure of playing a marvellous house show in Canterbury. Those of you who listen to my fizzy brain stream will know that I had one of the worst breakfasts and was really ill, and then took a sock puppet that I'd made around Canterbury Cathedral on a small tour, and got it stamped in my pilgrim's passport, because I visit cathedrals quite a lot. And it reminded me there, and one of the things I was there, I saw the grave of, the shrine of Thomas Beckett, and heard the other stories about the Archbishop of Canterbury and other such things. And obviously Henry VIII is brought up many times with the Reformation, and of course the scandal with Thomas Beckett. And also, me and the wife, the good lady riding instructor her indoors, have rediscovered the joys of the Tudors, which is very much like Wolf Hall, which I adore. Many of you already are quite aware, like by the mood lighting I had earlier on. It's like Wolf Hall if everyone's shouting and fucking a lot. And it's basically got Henry Cavill in it, which I keep forgetting. Baby Cavill. Little baby Henry Cavill there. Not Superman. Far fucking from it. But, you know, he's in it, and he's quite entertaining. And lots of people get murdered, even though they didn't in real life. But it's complete bollocks. We're talking on the stream before we started recording about Amadeus, which great story. Utter bollocks. Great narrative. Sometimes you've got to accept, as a fan of history and a fan of narrative, that sometimes these 2 stories do not go hand in hand. These 2 things don't go hand in hand. So, those are the 3 stories. We're going to have 3 of them, all about Henry VIII. Some small ones, some big ones, some different kind of things. So let's get underway with story number 1. Now, the first story is about Henry VIII's, remembering Henry VIII, particularly statues. This came about, remember in lockdown when everyone was getting hold of statues of bastards and throwing them in rivers, or putting paint on things and tearing down bastard statues? I got bored, so I started looking into statues of famous bastards, and discovered things like the famous ones of Oliver Cromwell, outside the House of Parliament, which is obviously quite an interesting one, considering, you know, the fact that he did a lot of damage in that place, but also just various dickheads throughout history that have got statues for various reasons. And it made me look into the idea of Henry VIII, a man who was so obsessed with self-image and being remembered and being Henry V. A lot of his life is him trying to be Henry V. You know, the big king that goes over to France, steals a load of France, makes it technically England, comes back home, dies of dysentery. Henry VIII did the same sort of thing, where instead he went to France, lost the last bit of France that England owned, which was Calais, came back and died of syphilis. So there's some parallels, but not very good ones. And Henry was obsessed with being remembered. He was all about his legacy, which is why he was so obsessed with having a male heir, which is also why it's hilarious that 2 of the most famous queens in English history come from Henry VIII, considering he didn't give a flying fuck about them. But more about that later. It's another 3rd story. But this one particularly about the man himself. Now, Henry VIII, one of the most famous monarchs we've ever had, obsessed, narcissistic, by the actual term what we would consider narcissistic, very vain. How many statues do you think he has in London? Well, I've looked, and I know, and I've seen it. It's fucking awful. He has the same number of statues in London as Freddie Mercury. 1. He has 1 statue outside of the St. Bartholomew, not St. Bartholomew Hospital, the St. Thomas Hospital, one of the children's hospitals. I think it was either St. Bartholomew or St. Thomas. Should have checked, but I'm not that kind of storyteller. I like being roughly accurate rather than 100% to make you go and actually do some of your research yourself. I'm going to make you interested in history and then make you go and check for the finer details because I might be lying. So it's a hospital. Now, why does a hospital have a statue of Henry VIII over the entrance? Which is there to this day, it's still there. It's because during the Reformation, Henry sent out his chaps to basically, did what they did. They went and stole everything from all of the monasteries, who were, to be fair, stealing from everyone else. It was basically thieves stealing from thieves. And he sent his chaps out to this St. James's, I believe. St. James, St. Thomas, St. Barth, I can't remember. It's one of the three. Someone will probably turn it up in the chat. But the officers of the court turn up to basically strip the what they think is an abbey, and it turns out it's a hospital. And so they begin to think this is possibly a bad idea, but they're sort of beginning the process of doing it. And then suddenly a communique comes from the story goes that Henry VIII found out about it and was livid, and then said, "Oh, we can't have this. We can't be taking from a hospital. What are you doing? Save the hospital." What more likely someone like Thomas Cromwell went, "That's shit optics, chap. We can't smash down a hospital. We may need that later, so just don't rob it. Just leave it." And so the people there were so happy thinking that Henry VIII had saved their hospital that they decided to dedicate it to Henry VIII and built a statue over the door. Some would say it's a way of going, look, we love Henry, isn't he great? But it's also a way of saying, look, Henry likes this, don't knock it down, you bastards. And so that statue is still there, and it remains the only one either left or actually built in London. Because I've heard a story that Henry VIII, being massively narcissistic, was also quite superstitious, even more so than normal than the people of the age. We're talking more mental than normally mental, because there are people who are mental, and then there are people who are mental of their time. For example, Admiral Lord Nelson. He was considered racist towards the French during the era when everyone was racist to the French. Everyone thought that Nelson was a bit much when he got drunk and started yelling about the French. And his was famous. People would try not to let him drink in case he got drunk and started yelling about the fucking French again. And this is a point when we were at war with them, and people thought, tone it down, Nelson. He's like, no, fuck you French bastards. And the same goes with Henry VIII. When everyone was looking at catguts to work out what the hell's going on next Wednesday, he was still thinking things were really odd. But then, to be fair, he had a lot of weird stuff going on, and he'd also been pissing everyone off and was excommunicated by the Pope. So if someone's going to be cautious about the spiritual, probably him. And so he didn't have any statues made during his lifetime because he thought that'd be terribly bad luck. He went preferred paintings and was hoping that people would build statues of him after he died. And more about that later, and we'll talk about that, because it doesn't actually happen the way he wants. So, our first story. Henry VIII has only one statue in London, the same as the king of rock and or roll, Freddie Mercury. I'll leave it for a second. And, well, at this point, if this was a podcast, there would be an advert. So, let's just make one. Hang on, I'll have a drink. Have a drink. We'll do a break. Drink break. Is your bread bland? You just can't decide what spread to put on it. It's looking at you, the bread that is, with tiny bread eyes. Cover me, master. Make me tasty. But what will you choose? Cheese again? Butter? Like a slag? Wrong. Choose jam. Jam. It makes everything sweeter. Strawberry, black currant, other such jams are of course available. And if it's not orange, it's just sparkling piss, also known as marmalade. Marmalade is not a jam, but it is. But it isn't. But it's wanky enough to deserve its own name. So remember, don't have marmalade, that's for tossers. Have jam, on bread, toasted or untoasted. Have it with nothing else. It requires Nothing else, unless you're one of those heathens that also has butter. But we don't judge you. We just want you to use jam. 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 The following message was brought to you by the Jam Association of Britain. Anyway, there's an advert for you. Strum. See, it's like a real podcast. We've got the weird noises, shit adverts and everything. Okay, so we've had our first story down. Second one. This is a longer story. And it's about Thomas Beckett. First of all, many of you already know, let's get the thing out of the way first that we all know. Thomas A. Beckett was never his name. That came from, as known if you've watched QI, from a typo. It's one of the world's most famous typos where people say that it was Thomas A. Beckett. He was never known as that. It was put in one pamphlet of his, and then it just got reprinted and reprinted and reprinted and got stuck. It's like the way that Jesus H. Christ got his name. His real name isn't Harry, it's just Jesus Christ. But we all know him as Jesus H. Christ because someone put it in the Bible once and we're now obsessed and stuck with it. So Thomas Beckett is a very interesting character. And the story that I want to tell you about involves Henry and the name of Thomas Beckett. But I need to give a bit of context. So, in storytelling fashion, and possibly to the amusement and understanding of absolutely no one, I'm going to Dan Carlin the shit out of this, and we're going to give you some context, okay? So, if you don't understand who I'm talking about, or who this bad impression is, just stick with it. If we're going to talk about Thomas Beckett, we need to understand why Henry VIII hated Thomas Beckett, right? He doesn't just destroy things for no reason. Henry is an asshole, but he's not that kind of asshole. So we have to go back to another Henry with another set of Thomases, because Henry VIII has loads of Thomases. He's up to his eyeballs in Thomases and wives. But Henry II is the one that deals with Thomas Beckett. So who is Thomas Beckett? Well, he started off as what we would now call a self-made man. As in, he's not self-made at all. But it's a nice phrase we say when there's social mobility. Back then, there wasn't no social mobility. The working class hadn't existed. It wasn't even a real thing. It was instead a small jump from a merchant. Now, before Henry II was king, he was just Prince Henry, staggering around doing absolutely nothing. Getting drunk, having a good time. And one of his friends was Thomas Beckett, and the two of them would go out around the town getting absolutely smashed. And then one day, it's a good thing for a king in England, you have yourself an Archbishop of Canterbury that does what you want. Because everyone wants a good time when they're a king. They don't want to be messed around or anything. Especially with God. That's why you have your own archbishop. If you have an archbishop that's on side, you can bring the bishops in, blah, 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 and it works. And then everyone's fine, everyone's happy. Because it works, and it's fine. So he hires Thomas Beckett when he becomes king and makes him archbishop. Because he thinks he's going to keep partying and drinking and do everything he says. But he doesn't. He sends Thomas Beckett, a merchant's son, to Canterbury. And what does he find? He finds God and takes it seriously and becomes Archbishop of Canterbury. You know what? Let's not bother with that. Anyway, so Thomas Beckett goes to Canterbury and actually takes the job seriously. He actually finds God and starts giving a flying shit about the job and does it actually quite well. He does make a shit ton of money. He starts giving alms to the poor, alms being a donation of money to poor people. He starts clearing up the clergy in the town of Canterbury. He does make himself a load of money and gets power and land. But then again, that is the bonus of being Archbishop of Canterbury, is a way of making a shitload of cash. And the king's fine with that. That's the upside of being Archbishop of Canterbury. No problem there. The problem is when the king starts asking for the Archbishop of Canterbury to bless certain things and okay and rubber stamp religious things, instead of doing exactly what the king wants, Thomas doesn't. He does what works for the church. He follows papal doctrine. He follows his conscience, the rude bastard, and the king doesn't like that. Now, it's not one incident that pisses him off. It's not like, oh, I'm refusing to, like Henry VIII with his weddings or his marriage or something. It's nothing like that. It's just constantly, no, I'm not going to do that. And no, that doesn't work. And it's right. And the king can't really argue it because he's doing it right. And he, with this distance between London and Canterbury, let's forget they don't have a train service, it's the 11th century. So there's a distance between them. A gulf between these two friends starts missing out. And some years they get on with each other, and some years they don't. We're talking decades of this going on, and it gets worse and worse. And occasionally the king goes to meet Beckett. They have a slagging match. Then they get drunk. Remember how much friends they are, how friendly they are, and you just rubber stamp a few things, mate. Just let's run the country a bit better. And then Henry goes back to London, and the Archbishop still keeps not doing everything he says. He's not saying no to everything. He's not trying to mess with them. He's not causing a rebellion. He's just not rolling over and doing everything. And in those days, that really pisses off Plantagenet kings. I want total obedience. He didn't get total obedience. And so Thomas Becket became more and more unpopular with the king, and became more and more a not quite enemy number one, but possibly enemy number 2, 3, 4 or 5. And one day the king gets drunk, and this is how the story goes. The story goes the king gets absolutely ratted and yells this phrase, "Who will rid me of this troublesome priest?" And 2 knights who've just come back from the crusade, so the story goes, or one of the many crusades, and then decides to act on what he says. Now, looking back, people are not sure whether the king actually said, who will rid me of this troublesome priest, as in, who will fire him? How do I fire him? Is the Archbishop of fucking Canterbury? Can we just make him go away? Can I just ignore him? Can just God please just make him shut up? Or did he actually want him murdered? This is a bone of contention, whether or not it's true or not, whether actually he did want to have Thomas Becket killed. But either way, two knights go to Canterbury Cathedral, and they kill Thomas Becket. Now, this is not untoward with the era. Plenty of bishops have been murdered. Plenty of kings have been murdered. It's one of those things in those times. The reason it's remembered is because it's not just a stabbing or a bit of poisoning. The knights turn up and they pretty much bludgeon him to death with swords in his church during a sermon. One priest tries to get in the way of the 2 knights, puts his arms up, and the knight goes through his arm and into his head so hard with a sword that he has to actually rip it out to then kill Thomas Becket. And there is apparently 3 massive head wounds where he just twats him in the head so badly that blood, guts and other such crap go all over the church floor, including brains. They actually talk about there's brains all over the floor. And whenever they have pictures of Thomas Becket as a saint, because he is made a saint by the Pope for being just so damn Christian, it's depicted with 3 swords just going through his head. It looks very odd. He looks like he's going about day-to-day business with 3 swords sticking out of his head. And that just is meant to represent the 3 wounds. So like I say, he is murdered in his church, in front of his congregation, apparently, and so sometimes it's late at night when he's praying and being so very holy, or sometimes in front of his entire flock. It's one of those stories, we're not sure whereabouts the truth comes from, but we do know that he's brutally murdered. Then, Henry II, this is where we try and work out what is the fiction, what is the truth, is where Henry II is then meant to be so hit with grief that he goes to Canterbury himself. He is so upset by the whole thing, he just rides himself to Canterbury. He doesn't even take his whole retinue, which you're normally meant to do. You know, with guards, and you take a palace with you and you prop up in someone's land. He just takes a horse and some of his best men and rides as fast as he can to Canterbury. It takes a few weeks to get there because, remember, they don't have Southwest trains. They have Southwest horses instead. Southeast trains, Southeast horses. Change the joke, pretend it was funny. And so they arrive, and Thomas is laid in in state as this martyr, and the king falls to his knees and begs Thomas, his friend, for forgiveness and God for having someone murdered, because he doesn't try to deny it. Everyone's like, they were sent by the king. These two guys said they were sent by the king, and to be fair, it's a good defense because they don't get executed, they don't get prosecuted. He basically banishes them, and the story is they do get brought back after going on another crusade, because what isn't good penance unless you're murdering some people from another country, and so they are sort of forgiven for taking his word literally. So he takes the burden on himself. And this is where the story gets another interesting level, because the story goes that when they were looking at the body of Thomas, that the king still thought, he was just playing it. He was just trying to mess me around. He was just trying to make more money off me. He was greedy. He was terrible. And he found this hair shirt that monks used to wear at the time, which is basically a shirt with loads of hairs on the inside, so it's meant to cause irritation. The idea is that you suffer like Christ, but I'm pretty sure that Jesus would disagree that being nailed to a bit of wood and then being put in a hairy shirt are not really the same sort of level of suffering, but thanks for the chance. And so he realises it was sincere, and they look in Thomas's quarters and it's actually bare. He lived a humble life, and a good life, and he was not the good life. He wasn't sort of having an allotment, although monks and priests did, so maybe he had a good life. But he was living sincerely as Archbishop of Canterbury. And so the king again thinks, oh crap, as modern people would say, the optics did not look good. So what he decided to do was do penance. And so there's several stories of this. One of them that he literally whips himself. He wears Thomas's hairy shirt, which still sounds weird. It also sounds like a euphemism. And the other one is that he was meant to have struck naked in the streets and then wandered through Canterbury with bare feet until he could walk no more. So he basically is just like flailing oneself, showing penance and begging forgiveness, and asked forgiveness of the Pope, because back then the English gave a shit what the Pope thought, and the Pope canonised who is Saint Thomas. And Thomas Beckett became a saint. He was a canonised English saint for his devotion to God and dying in such a horrible way. And so, to make up for this, Henry II built a shrine to Thomas Beckett. And it stood for hundreds of years, and pilgrims from across the Christian world would go to visit and get miracles from Thomas's blood and healing and all the sort of things you would get from ritualistic bullshit and other such things. But it became a massive tourist attraction. So over the years, the cult of Thomas Beckett grew, and so money would come in through the house, through Canterbury Cathedral. And in fact, they actually built an extension, and I've seen it. It's quite funny when you look at it, because it looks like a normal-sized arse of a cathedral, if you know what I mean. And then there's an extension where they decided we need a bigger space for people to worship at the glorious altar and give us money. So it became like a sort of a gift shop and other such things, where you could literally buy relics and other such things for Thomas Beckett, which is something I always found really, really funny. So that's the context of who Thomas Beckett is. Thomas Beckett is effectively, let's bring it forward a little bit to Henry VIII. So Henry VIII has several problems: women and Thomases. So there's Thomas Wolsey, who refused to give him his marriage to Anne Boleyn, which pissed him off, and then Thomas More, who refused to subjugate himself to the Church of England, and Thomas Cromwell, who basically did exactly what Henry VIII did, and then Henry VIII blamed him for all the things that went wrong and had him killed. So he doesn't have a good record with Thomases. So one thing he definitely doesn't like is a famous Saint Thomas who has his own cult that literally has people from around the Christian world, including the Pope, sending people there to make penance and send for miracles and sending money and other such things, which of course Henry VIII wants himself, and then instead he wants that money himself, and he basically wants to get rid of this idea. And and by the way, what is he famous for? Telling a king no. Not a good person in Henry VIII's books, our friend Thomas Beckett was. So they decided, well, Henry had realised he did such a smashing job removing Anne Boleyn from the record books, as we all know, that we don't know who the fuck Anne Boleyn is. He did a great job. He spent many decades after Anne Boleyn's death trying to remove all references to her name in records, her titles, everything, which is why we've never heard of her. and which is why one of the most popular rubber ducks you can buy in the house of the Tower of London is a tiny Anne Boleyn duck. So he did a great job because she's been immortalised as a fucking rubber duck. So using his great powers to remove Anne Boleyn, he thought, I can do that, I'll do it to Thomas Beckett. So what did he do? He goes to Canterbury, well, his soldiers go to Canterbury, and they end up, they go to the crypt and to the shrine of Thomas Beckett, and they smash it. They literally get his skeleton and smash it into bits. There's only 2 surviving bits. One of his thumb bone and one's a thigh bone, and they got sent off to different parts of the world. Now, one of the funny things, a little tangent of a story within a story, which I think you'll like and is completely true, is the fact that they came together as part of a massive pilgrimage to honour him about 10 years ago, and they were brought in, one from Poland, one ended up in in South America, had been touring around, and then came together and they brought it in to sort of match up in Canterbury at his shrine at the same time, and it was beautiful. There's 2 processions came together, but unfortunately there was booked in a naked bike ride on the same day at the same time, and they all 3 met at once. I wish I could have been there. That would have been spectacular. So he desiccated and decimated the shrine, basically trying to sort of remove all evidence. I'm just relogging into my computer, bear with me. So basically, sorry, my computer shut down whilst we were talking because the battery life ran out. I do apologise. We're back on now. We know what we're doing. And so, you know what we're doing. And that's me. So I know that works. So he tries to destroy everything, and he basically does the same tactic he does with Anne Boleyn. He goes to Canterbury, which is the centre of... It's basically in the same way. Imagine going to Windsor and removing all evidence that the king exists. Because you go into every shop, there are bobbleheads. You can get bobbleheads of Liz still in Windsor Castle. In every shop, there's tat shops selling all kinds of crap. Every pub is called the Archbishop of Canterbury or Thomas Beckett. He's referenced everywhere because as Archbishop, he used his money to set up schools, parts of universities, all kinds of stuff. He did tons, and people dedicated things to him as their patron saint. Oh, he was an unofficial patron saint of England for a long time. He used to be Edward the Confessor, and then when the French realised we don't want an Anglo-Saxon, let's do this generic person. Maybe we go for Thomas Beckett. And then people went, no, a guy that may not even be real. Let's just use, say, George, because that's just easier for everyone. But it nearly was Thomas Beckett. So imagine removing everything. And the locals, in the same way that the Reformation, were sort of in that kind of they were for it because it's like, yeah, they are dickish, but what are we getting at? We're meant to support this, but what? Imagine you're the general public. Imagine you're someone working in the land or working in a pub or even a merchant, right? So the church you use has its priest in it. The great big monastery that's just full of all kinds of woo-woo and God talks there and there's stuff and loads of money gets sent there and they look after poor people and they come out and they do things. It's suddenly demolished and you're like, oh, okay, what's happening? Well, all their riches are being spread around the people. Oh, brilliant. Are we getting any of that? No. The king's buying more prostitutes and buying big ships. So you're sort of like, am I for this? Are the people are in support of this? Are they? And it's the same thing with Canterbury. They're like, are we really? The Archbishop did quite a lot. I mean, that's why we have schools. And so the general public were basically pretending to go along with it. Because what happened is that Henry thought he understood Thomas Beckett, or understood Canterbury, but he didn't at all. So he sent his men, and his men destroyed everything with the word Thomas Beckett written on it. Went through libraries, went through books, went through shops, everything, destroyed it. But left the town. They didn't want to demolish the town. They don't want to do that. They went, no, take the name down. Call it something else. Name it Henry. Name it John. Name it Edward the Confessor. Whatever. Just not Thomas Beckett. And so they trash everything. Everyone goes, yeah, okay, yeah, fuck Thomas Beckett. And then when the guys leave and they've realised, haha, we removed every reference of Thomas Beckett, we shall leave. And they bugger off. And they said, all that's left are these pictures of birds. That's nice. There's birds everywhere. Little pictures of chuffs. It's a tiny black. It's like a blackbird with a red belly, red thing chuff. It's a bird that migrates from Europe to across to Asia and such. It moves around a lot. It pops in, pops out, and it's also the sigil of Thomas Beckett. And if you go to Canterbury now, you can see on pretty much every fucking building from the 1500s, 3 little birds sat on their doorstep, singing sweet songs of melodies pure and true. That's not actually what 3 Little Birds is about, but it's quite funny that it has some semblance. So they removed the name, but they didn't take down the sigil of him. Now in those days, they didn't really have photographs. They didn't have photographs. So they would use pictures and pictorial things, which is why we have, like, barbers have the red and white tube. Instead of having the word barbers, you'd have that picture, or 3 gold balls hanging outside of a pawnbroker's, which is where Cash Converters has a pair of bollocks hanging out the front. It's a weird thing connected to that, is that the general public used symbols to work out who things were. So by removing the names, only people who could read didn't know that Thomas Beckett would be removed, which was the gentry and merchants. The general public, the signs were left because all of the little birds, which are on every fucking building in Canterbury, were left over. So Henry, all he did was smash a shrine for someone that had been murdered by a prick called Henry, put his bones into hiding, which became super relics, made the Catholics really love Thomas Beckett, to the point that when Henry died, everyone went, should we make him an Anglican saint? And everyone went, yeah, he was fucking great. And also then the people of Canterbury realised, we can't read, so he's still here and never really left, and you can't kill Thomas Beckett. But Henry did such a good job though, and like Anne Boleyn, we have no idea who Thomas Beckett is. You've probably never heard the name. He's not famous at all. But he does also have a tiny, in the gift shop of Canterbury Cathedral, a little rubber duck, which is Thomas Beckett. Because apparently the biggest symbol of Tudor failure is a rubber duck of your enemies. So that's the story of Thomas Beckett and Henry VIII trying to remove him after Henry II did, but then regretted it. So that's the second story. Drinky time. So we've come to our third story. But before we do, a public service announcement. Hang on, sorry, I better do that. Because we're pretending we're a podcast. I've been thinking about flags recently. They're great, aren't they? Blowing in the wind. They can tell us where someone's from, what their sexuality is, whether they think pies are great, or weirdly, a giant picture of Ainsley Harriot's face. Pop culture reference. But we all love a good flag. Sure, I love to wave them. But some people like to have sex with them. Don't fuck flags. It's a bit messy. No one wants to see you fucking a flag, going balls deep in a bit of fabric. So if you see a flag, don't fuck it. Thank you. Ostrom. Yeah, if you guys, one thing I could definitely do with, if people could send me ideas for shit adverts for my podcast, that'd be great, until I actually get real podcasts. Real adverts. If you have a drink in your hand, raise it up, put it in your face. So, Henry. Our final story this evening, or one of 3 Henrys. Henry III, the shittest of all Henrys, because he was beige. So, we've talked about Henry's memory. We've talked about Henry trying to remove things. But let's talk about, again, let's circle back around to our first story, but in a different way. Let's talk about how Henry wanted to be remembered and how he has been remembered. Well, we all remember him. Remember him as the guy that basically sort of created the Anglican Church and the Church of England by writing it on the back of a fag packet, metaphorically, and just basically shagging people. But that's not what I mean. He wanted to be remembered as a massive, famous warrior king. Like I said before, he wanted to be Henry V. He wanted to be over in France, kicking French bottom and coming back, sleeping with their wives and dying of dysentery, but without the dying by literally shitting himself to death. He wanted to live for a long time, and to be fair, he did. He did live for a long time. And to be fair, we do remember him. He's possibly one of the most well understood British monarch, and British and Irish monarch. I think if you asked anyone around the world to name British monarchs, you would probably be able to name Henry VIII. I mean, to be fair, if you're going to name Henry VIII, you could probably name Henry 1 to 7, because by logic there would be still 7 more of them. But you know what I mean? They could probably tell you about the 6 wives. You could talk about the Reformation, that he was a fat fucker, probably that he died of syphilis, and he was a bit of a prick, even by prick standards of the day. But he wanted to be remembered in that sort of vain kind of way of how he's improved the world in a sort of deliberate way, rather than accidentally for his own deal, creating a new religion. And so he very modestly wanted a mausoleum, and he designed it. He had it designed, he had it created, and this fucking thing was bigger than Westminster Abbey. He was go hard, go home kind of thing. And he had this thing designed in his life. Like I said, he wanted to have statues after he was dead, because that would be weird if they were alive, because we don't want to, it's not all about him, but it was all about him. So his son, Edward, the one that didn't last very long and died, who was meant to be going hyper fucking Protestant, after his dear old dad, and also his advisors and such, thought, well, Dad did bankrupt the country by losing us France, fucking all of the nobility of Europe, and bankrupting us by eating all the pies. So we can't afford this mausoleum, so I guess what we'll do is we'll leave it for now. We'll shelve them. I'll do them later on. We'll get this thing with France and Spain sorted, and when we get some cash, we'll build it as a great memorial to my father, Henry. And then Edward dies, and Lady Jane Grey comes in for 9 days. She's a bit preoccupied with trying not to be murdered in the middle of a coup, and doesn't even know that Henry VIII has a desire to build a massive mausoleum, because she isn't queen for very long. Mary takes over. Lady Jane Grey is dead. And Mary is a little less giving a fuck about what her dad wants. Remember, her mum, who was loyal to him for about 26 years roughly of marriage, gave her who would become his oldest heir, Mary. He had them declared illegitimate. Basically said, well, you fucked my brother, so therefore our wedding's null and void, and then you don't really, I'll get rid of it. And then crashed the British church into the ground so he could marry some other woman. And then during that time, so he could bang this other woman that he ended up dumping, I think within 5 years, he declared Mary a bastard on several occasions. And I don't just mean you went, fucking hell, Mary, you're a right bastard. Actually legally said you're a bastard and you're entitled to nothing. And then tried to buy their love later on, when he realised, I might not have a son, so she might be in charge. I probably should look after her a bit. And then paid for houses and various other things to look after her, to sort of sweeten the deal. She kind of remembered that and decided, you know what? I'm not going to build you a fucking mausoleum. I'm going to bring back Catholicism. Like, fucking hard. We're talking Die Hard to Die Harder. It's Cathol to Cathol harder. And she does pretty much Thomas More, but with Protestant. Well, yeah, she basically is Thomas More too. By the way, Thomas More was the guy that the last Pope, no, the current Pope, I think, made into a saint. Because what he did was burn Protestants. That's what he did during his life, and the Pope decided it'd be a fun idea to build relations with England by canonising someone who was famous for murdering people. That's kind of like saying, you know what, Hitler, fuck it, let's give him a knighthood posthumously. So Thomas More was famous for that, but yeah, we're talking about Mary. Anyway, Mary started burning Protestants, but one funny thing is, England didn't burn witches, but they burnt a fuckload of Christians. and which is why she got the name Bloody Mary. Although nowadays it's sort of more like, is she actually looking at the context of the time? Was she less of a dick than we think? Which is beginning to be the thing, where she's actually of her time, when Henry was just a massive bastard. And considering that everyone loves Elizabeth afterwards, for quite understandable reasons, that Mary's got a bit of a bad rap by comparison, so she is very much of her time. So by the standard of the time, being quite reasonable. Everyone's burning Protestants or Catholics. You got to burn someone. And so she did that and tried to bring back the old faith. But most people were like, actually, we quite like not having the Pope. And we like listening to the Word of God in English. So we'll stick with that. That sounds all right. So when she dies and hands over to Elizabeth, she hands over the plans to Elizabeth. And go, Dad want on her deathbed. Apparently, the story goes on the deathbed when she went, "Oh, you can be the king, please, the queen. Please don't undo all of the work I've done. Please return the Catholic Church." And Liz goes, "Nah, I won't kill Catholics, but I don't like them. I'll do that. Is that all right?" And part of that deal, she also goes, "By the way, Dad wants to build this. Goodbye," and then dies. So Liz 1 has then got the plans for this massive Westminster Abbey-sized mausoleum of her dad, who also, when she was a child, was made to be princess, saw what she did to her sister Mary, and one of those things is that Elizabeth and Mary actually got on quite well because both of them were fucked over by their dad, and so she saw her sister being treated like shit, and then her mum was accused of being an incestuous whore in a court. It was law, that's what she was said, and then she was declared a bastard, and then she was undeclared a bastard when her dad realised, shit, I might need heirs, like now, and bought her off in the same way, and so what did Mary, and then so she also sort of was like, I'm not spending money on a fucking mausoleum. And then she reigned for as that time she did. She had wars with the Spanish. She was doing the conquering of Ireland, which everyone does. It's fashionable, and twatting the Irish, and the Irish twatting the Scots and the Welsh, and everyone twatting each other. And so she decides, I'm not wasting my money on a fucking mausoleum the size of Westminster Abbey for a man that thought I was a bastard. No, fuck that. And so when she dies, and James VI of Scotland becomes James I, comes over, she hands the plans to him and went, my dad wanted this built. I said, yeah, and then he gets them, and it sort of goes, so you can imagine you're James I of Britain now, we're talking, England, Scotland, Union of the Crowns, talking about a Great Britain, all that's going on. You got various rebellions, like what we're doing in France. Now we're not fighting each other. Oh shit! All right. So you're now King of England and King of Scotland at the same time. Would you like to build a massive great big mausoleum for this dead guy that's been dead for quite some time now? You'd be sort of like, I'm actually quite busy. I've got all this stuff to do. Also, we're talking about like tradition. They've been dumping him in a skip for like the last 70 years. It's kind of a tradition now. We'll just leave him in there. Fuck him. And then so his son is Charlie 1, who's a bit busy getting his head cut off. So doesn't really want to waste money on that, and he's banging to Catholicism, so doesn't really like Henry either. Oliver Cromwell, another Cromwell, not related to Thomas Cromwell, but very puritanical, hated the excess of Henry VIII. There's a war on. I'm creating a new model army. I don't want to build a fucking mausoleum. This keeps on going. So where was Henry during all this? Well, they put him in a chapel in Windsor, in the corner, out of the way, in a coffin that's in a sarcophagus kind of thing, just there, waiting for his mausoleum to be built. And over the years, the plans have been passed down, and it was never, as you may have noticed, by the great big lack of a mausoleum the size of Westminster fucking Abbey, it was never built. And he's still there, in a side chapel, in Windsor Castle, waiting to be buried. And the funny thing is, it was mentioned recently where he was kept. Do you remember when Liz died? I don't know if you've noticed that, when Liz, the second, not the first one. I mean, we were all there when Elizabeth I ended, the Tudor era ended, and the Stuarts took over. It was a fun time. Roughs were really in. So were Armadas. But, and I don't mean groove, I mean Spanish. But Liz too, when she died, and people may have made a fuss, a little bit. She was, they had two ceremonies. One was the great big one with the guns, the bagpipes, and the paedophile reading out stuff on the news, and the paedophile in the audience. You can guess who they are yourselves. If I say it's litigious on the interweb. But so they had the grand thing for everyone, and then they had a small ceremony in a private chapel for the family, for the the human side. So Elizabeth Windsor, the person, could have a small funeral with her grandchildren and her children, including the pedo one, and they were in this small little chapel, which is where Henry VIII is kept. So if you can imagine, you're in this tiny wee chapel saying goodbye to your nan, and in the corner is a fucking great big box, and someone goes, "What's in the box?" in a kind of like Seven way. "What's in the box?" And someone goes, "Oh, that's Henry VIII. Is he still in there? Yeah, he's still in there. In a box. In a small chapel in Windsor Castle. Still waiting for his twatty mausoleum to be built." So this guy that tore up English religion, that made a complete revamp or trashed all of these places for his own vanity and for his own lusts and other such things, and remade the religious landscape of this country, who wanted to be remembered full time as a warrior, was a failure as a warrior, was left in storage for hundreds of years, where he still sits like Christmas decorations, and he will probably remain there as long as there is an English crown, because it's now become tradition that the plans for his mausoleum are passed down from monarch to monarch, and Henry has to stay in the attic, because that's how we do things. And so that is the end of the story. That Thomas Beckett, that Freddie Mercury has a statue in London, Anne Boleyn and Thomas Beckett both have rubber ducks, and Henry VIII is stuck in a box in Windsor Castle in a cupboard with a Christmas tree and lights and such. Cool thing. Actually, you know what? I'll do the theme thing again. That's the end. Well, there we are. A lovely end to tonight's story time. 3 lovely stories about an angry man called Henry and his desperate desire to be really fucking popular by being a bit of a twat. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. I will say farewell shortly. And a big thank you to all of you for streaming. And also a big thank you to everyone on Patreon for supporting what is now a self-employed musical endeavour. I am a self-employed musician. This is now my job, sort of. So thank you very much for the support and love, you lovely people. Thank you for joining me on the stream. Thank you for listening on the podcast in the future, watching on YouTube, where this will be in a couple of days' time for you to listen on demand to your heart's content. If you want to join me for my Tuesday streams, I'm not doing this Tuesday's stream tomorrow, because I'm going to be writing songs and such, so I'll be returning in the following week. If you want to follow me on Twitch, not only do you get to join in the post-show discussion, where we'll be nattering about fucking flags and books and possibly which story we think's true or bollocks, and other such rubbish, and talking about gin things. The conversations I have with the streams after the main stream is finished are always delightfully mental, so I highly recommend, if you have the chance to join us on Twitch live one day. It's always at 9 o'clock. Aubrey Blakelidge, the story times is the last Monday of every month, or it's every Tuesday from 9 p.m. until indescript time. So we've had our 3 stories, and they've been all absolutely lovely. I think they've all been fit. I'm going to have to come up with some more stories coming up soon. So thinking of coming up, we got the streams that I talked about, and so Fizzy Brain is basically, for those who don't know, Fizzy Brain is a sort of a conversation about what I've been doing rather than what I'm meant to be doing. So it's a way of me sort of channeling my procrastination into some kind of rocket fuel to make me actually write an album. And then talk bollocks and get drunk, basically. It's good fun. Come and join me. So you can find me on Twitch, like I said. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me on Threads, despite the fact I'm trying to find a replacement for it because it's a pile of horrible shit. fuck Twitter and the far right Roman saluting arse hat that suddenly the week after doing a suspicious Roman salute at a white supremacist rally, sorry, MAGA rally, then goes and does a speech for the AfD, who are the right-wing Nazi party of Germany. Yeah, it's not related at all. Faceache and Instagram, still trying to work out replacements, but I'm still there. Aubrey Blake was one of those. I'm looking at Pixel late mate thing, the Mastodon thing, to see if that's any good. There's no bugger on it at the moment, so that's probably going to die a death, but if you want to join me there, feel free. You can find me on Bandcamp, where you can download some of my music, check out my album and such, which is on Aubrey Blakeledge, or the Sweet Chunks Band, which is the same for Spotify. It'd be Aubrey Blakeledge on there. YouTube, sorry, not Aubrey Blakeledge, it's Sweet Chunks Band on Spotify. YouTube, you can find Sweet Chunks. You can also find episodes of this downloadable on there. I'm going to start putting up the old Fizzy Brain back issues on there as well, so you have more stuff to listen to, and other such stupid reels and various other things. And you can also find me on TikTok and all these other things. And of course, Patreon is a way of supporting musicians nowadays better than everywhere else. So for £3 a month, you can basically prop all this mad stuff up, and in return you'll get free music as I make it, demos and such. You'll also get free merch sent across every now and then, and access to the download of Fizzy Brain and this podcast for you to download at your leisure, the audio and the visual version. Pixel Fed, that's the one. See if it works. Give me a shout, say hello. There's not that many people on there, so it means it's actually more interaction and that sort of thing. So yes, thank you very much for joining me this evening. However you support me, whether you're just listening or you're on Spotify or you're on Patreon or you're joining me at shows. If you're in if you're in Portsmouth next weekend on the 2nd of February at 8 p.m, I'll be at the Wine Vaults as part of IceBreaker, and I'll also be there for most of the day. So if you're in Portsmouth, come and say hello. It's a very great little underground festival, very cheap, it's about 15 quid I think, and you can get in access to all the venues, see all kinds of music. Yes, it's going to be a great Saturday out. So there's all kinds of first. Thank you. It's the first, not the second. I am so shit at dates. God, I'm crap at dates. Thank you, chap, for telling me that. Yes, so IceBreaker, 1st of February, all day long in the city of Portsmouth in the Southsea area. Go online, Google it, you'll find it. Now, speaking of Googling, before I say farewell, don't forget in the descriptions, whatever, the comments, say what you think of the 3 stories and which one you think is true. The statues, Thomas Beckett, or the Henry being in a box. So yeah, if you think one of them's true, one of them's false, which ones, put your thoughts in and let me know. And for those of you on the Twitch stream, hold on to your trousers. We're going to relax, finish drinking this gin, and we'll have a little natter. So please follow on all those different things. I said follow and subscribe and all that bollocks like you ought to say. So there's one other thing less to say, which is if you have a drink in your hand, raise it up and put it in your face. And I will see you next month or next Tuesday. See you next Tuesday. Good evening.